So I did a little experiment. I've been hearing a lot of commotion about this new Russo Brothers movie on Netflix. Actually, I probably haven't been hearing that much commotion. Nobody's watched it. But the people who have watched it have been talking about how the Russo brothers absolutely butchered the adaptation of the Simon Stalenhag graphic novel, The Electric State. Sorry, Simon, if I'm mispronouncing that. So what I did for my little experiment was I read that book, then I watched the movie straight back to back. I did what no man has ever done. And I think it was a pretty unique experience, and my point of view with that self-induced whiplash that I felt reading that and then watching this turd, if I will. I think I've got some things to say. Now let me give you a little bite-sized version of that experience, and you can tell me how you feel. You can tell me in the comments, actually. I want to see if you come away with the same feelings that I did. Alright, let me read you a little excerpt from the book first. The war had been fought and won by drone pilots. Men and women in control rooms, far from the battlefields, where unmanned machines fought each other in a strategy game played over 7 years. The pilots of the Federal Army had lived a good life in brand new suburbs where they could choose from 30 kinds of cereal on their way home from work. The drone technology was praised because it spared meaningless loss of life. The collateral damage was of two kinds: the civilians unfortunate enough to be caught in the crossfire, and the children of the federal pilots, who, as a concession to the godheads of defense technology, were all stillborn. Cut here to Jason Alexander trying to beat a robot with a broom.
Robot! You speak to human?
And so that was the Russo brothers' take on the same material. I think you can immediately tell the difference in tone there. So basically, in this video, I'm going to ask the question, what the fuck happened? Why did they decide to butcher this book so badly? Was it some sort of sick joke? Certainly was an expensive joke. You do kind of feel like somebody's taunting you. Somebody behind the camera doesn't like the audience. I don't know. So the Russo brothers will lead you to believe that all these changes were made to try and make this book more family friendly. Yeah, no shit, dumbasses. Of course you made it more family friendly. That's very clear. But in the interview, they claim their reasons for this are noble. They claim that they found the heart of the book and showed that in their film. That being the way technology can wreak havoc on the minds of the population. How people should put down their phones. And they were claiming the most important people to hear this message was a younger generation. They say the writer of this novel, Mr. Simon here, he has children himself and said it was a good way to send that message to the kids. Interesting to note though, with all my research, I couldn't actually find a quote of Simon saying this himself. A little game of Simon Says, perhaps. That's Cameron behind the camera. He came up with that joke. If we could get a little round of applause here. I'd argue that this isn't actually what's at the heart of the graphic novel at all. I mean, just from the little excerpt I read you, you'd argue that the most thematically relevant thing here is war and drone technology. But it's not just thematically. I mean, this thing's a graphic novel and it has beautiful, dark, despondent, jarring juxtapositions. It's all in the imagery. That's what's so important. It's all about its atmosphere, and oftentimes it's disturbing. It doesn't make you feel good. No matter how much they're trying to mold it into a Marvel movie, it just never was. It's got to be one of the most egregious adaptations I've ever seen for that reason. And being in that unique place where I only read the book for this review and watched the movie so closely to it, I'm in uncharted territories. But honestly, I couldn't have prepared myself for just how extreme it would be. Okay, so here I'm going to go through the plot. I'm going to go through the plot of the book and the movie at the same time, kind of jumping back and forth and showing you the key differences. So fair warning, there will be spoilers throughout. That spoiler warning is only for the book, because you should not watch that turd of a movie anyway. One of the first notes I wrote down while watching it in my little book was, the dialogue. It's so bad, which I think is a pretty good summarization of the whole movie. I'm going to quickly play devil's advocate just for a little bit here. I want to acknowledge that adapting a 100-page graphic novel into a full feature film is pretty difficult, especially one with very minimal dialogue in it. Fleshing these characters out so they can carry a whole feature film was always going to be a difficult task, don't get me wrong. Just inherently by the nature of a graphic novel and the nature of a feature film, it was going to need a lot of changing to make it work. The characters and the plot, they had to be different. Basically, I'm just saying it's fair enough to change the book. That's not what I'm angry at. It's the change of tone. And more so, it isn't fair enough the way they cram exposition down your goddamn throat. And it's the problem with a lot of Netflix products like this. It assumes you're a big dummy who isn't actually watching the movie. And by assuming that, they make the movie more boring and they make me want to go on my phone. Somewhat of a cruel irony there, I think. They just don't trust the audience at all. And this is one of the fundamental differences between the book and the movie. The book trusts the audience. It doesn't give everything away from the start. It drip feeds you information and slowly builds the tension. There's mystery. Each image reveals something nasty that's lurking in the shadows. Despondent images of a war we never got to see. Every memory it tells you deepens your connection to the main character, a lost soul who seemingly has given up all hope. It's actually the exploration. It's the way we learn about what's happened in this world, the way we learn about our main character that's so compelling. Remember that passage I read from earlier? So that's the start of the book. Now compare that to the start of the movie. In the movie, they neatly summarize what happened in the war with a series of news bulletins and flashbacks and people reacting. And the war is very simple. It's robots versus humans. That's it. It succinctly gives all the exposition straight away to the audience. And it immediately eliminates any form of grey that could be explored in this war between the robots and the humans, which isn't even really what the book's about. In the book, the war was humans versus humans still, just fought through drones and robots, and the technology had just reached such a crazy fever pitch. And the remnants of robots scattered across the country is just so captivating. But in the book, it was never humans versus robots. Maybe there's animosity to robots because of the war, but it's so much more nuanced than what the movie's gonna tell you. It's not simple what happened in this war, but it is believable, which is pretty scary. Feels like in this day and age, it's what the world is coming to. I'll talk about that more later, but it did say a lot about warfare and how technology is coming to play into it. I said earlier, I briefly mentioned the main character, who's going across the country with seemingly no hope left, but she has a robot by her side who she calls Skip. Despite how hopeless she feels, you assume there's something at the other end, because why is she traversing her way across such dangerous areas to get to this location? But you don't know. So the mystery is what keeps you engaged the whole time. You want to know what she's searching for. And spoiler alert for the book here, major spoiler alert. It's actually her brother. This robot who she's been journeying with is actually a drone operated by her brother who's been taken over by this weird technology thing, which you can read more about in the book. But basically the robot is accompanying her back to her brother's withering corpse, who's stuck in an electronic prison he can't escape, slowly sucking the life out of him. It's pretty depressing. A quite grotesque and black analogy about the way we are consumed by technology. And it isn't handed to you right away, it's earned. Now guess the difference between when the book feeds you that information I just told you, and when the film gives you that information. In the book, like I said, it's right at the end. That's the central mystery. Why she treats this robot so warmly, why it seems to be the only care she has left in this depressing world, we don't know. The movie, the first few scenes, it's one of the first things we see. And, well, I think the scene where you find out actually speaks for itself. It is unbelievable how on the nose it is. Basically, the robot storms into her room and she goes, "Ah, robot!" And she gets really scared. And the robot starts pointing at a photo of her brother, pointing at it like this, going, "That's me! That's..." He can't speak, but it couldn't be much more obvious. Now let me read you page 119, where we finally establish who Skip is and what's been happening. When Skip came to get me in Soest, the city was falling apart. I'd just seen Miss Styles in the house across the road get dragged down and shot in the street by a group of armed men. Ted had been down on the riverbank for a week. Amanda was long gone, and my black heart lay broken and discarded, somewhere on Soest's desolate streets. I hadn't eaten in days. Not that there was any food. The pantry was full of canned food and old pasta. But I think I had decided to die. I can't really remember, but I do believe that's what I'd planned to do. I don't know how Skip found the Kid Cosmo drone, or me for that matter, but when that yellow robot stood there on the driveway with the toy cradle in its arms, the same toy I'd given my brother 9 years earlier, I understood immediately. "Skip, is that you?" I said, and the yellow robot nodded. "That's a kick-ass Kid Cosmo you found." Then I sat down on the driveway and wept. Like I said, Ted had been down on the riverbank for a week. He was sprawled beneath a beach umbrella, and we left Soest in his old Corolla. The vultures had already eaten most of his body. But below the horn of the Neurocaster, his mouth was still moving, like he was dreaming. Fuck me. Hope you had your tissues ready. That is such a beautiful and heartbreaking and genuinely emotional moment. Why did they not use it? But more than that, why does the movie establish this instantly? It's to make it more cookie cutter, I guess. Because it would be confusing for kids, I'm sure the Russo brothers would argue, to have a mystery. Like, kids can't follow a mystery. But you have to look no further than a film like The Iron Giant, which tackles really similar themes, honestly, and was made for kids, and was successful. It's one of the most beloved films ever made. That's too much. That's what I'm gonna say, because I love that movie. What I'm trying to say is you can tackle themes in nuanced and genuinely interesting ways, even if it's for kids. We all know that. But the Russo brothers just chose not to. And this points to another massive difference, I think, between the book and the film. Also at the beginning. It's how the book begins with the journey having already started. We enter the story after the road trip has begun. And so we're trying to pick up the pieces and learn what's happening, which is really interesting. It puts you in the same position as our lead, a lost, wandering soul, moving through this strange world. And you compare that to the start of the movie, where we're introduced to both characters before they go on the run. And I know this sounds like a really small, minute detail to get nitpicky on, but it actually completely changes the story. It deflates the tension and intrigue and curiosity of the audience. I will say, to the movie's credit, it does improve ever so slightly by the introductions of Chris Pratt and Anthony Mackie, due to the fact that, if nothing else, they have very good chemistry and are actually charismatic and funny. They play the same characters they play in Marvel. Chris Pratt is just doing Star-Lord, but like, he's good at it. So I was pretty thankful for something interesting to watch. This is also where I was acquainted with a very interesting fact, that Millie Bobby Brown was supposed to be a child in this film. Like, Chris Pratt just says it, like, get out of here, kid. And she's supposed to be a high school student. Aren't we done saying Millie Bobby Brown is a high school student? Like, why is Netflix still trying to push this agenda? She looks like an adult. She cannot get away with him calling her kid and treating her like a genuine child. It's just a strange thing that I noticed. I don't know. I genuinely don't know. Relatability for kids, I guess. Use a child as an actor. I've written in my script here that I'm going to use their character names, but I'm not going to remember those, so I'm just going to call them their actor names. I'm sorry. Let's keep it simple here. I wrote in here, Keats is harboring robots. And I went, who the fuck is Keats? It's Chris Pratt. Chris Pratt is harboring robots. So basically, with the introduction of Pratt and Mackie, we now have a situation where Millie Bobby Brown and Chris Pratt are both harboring illegal robots. Because in this world, it's illegal to have a robot with you, due to the law. You know how it is. They go on an adventure, chased by Giancarlo Esposito, the fantastic Giancarlo Esposito, who operates a robot drone, trying to chase them down. Millie Bobby Brown is trying to take down this big corporation called Skate, who makes this technology where you put the thing on, the thing. You know, you have a shape photo of it now. I can't be bothered explaining it. The whole war is being powered by her brother's brain because it's so strong and powerful. That's true. And so she's trying to go save her brother from his, I guess his brain being, I don't know, the juice being taken out. I don't know what's going on. That's really the plot they went with. Basically, this big company, Skate, is run by Stanley Tucci. Tucci. Show me a photo of Stanley Tucci's ass. Show me a photo of Stanley Tucci's tushy now. I gotta keep people were getting bored. I had to keep them engaged. Show them a picture of Stanley Tucci's ass. So basically, Millie Bobby Brown's brother is being kept prisoner to keep the war effort alive and to power this technology that people use to go into some sort of dream state to picture their lives as a better place. If that makes sense. Through the story, they cross paths with Woody Harrelson, who plays a robot Mr. Peanut, obviously. And his character is the leader of a group of robots who have created somewhat of like a robot utopia, where all robots are free to roam and live as they like in like this big shopping mall. Which is actually a pretty cool concept on its own. It just feels so random in this movie. It feels just shoved in there. I'm not going to go into that much more detail about the story. It's honestly boring me just to recount it. There are a few other storylines too. Ki Hu Kwan's has a little cameo, I guess. He's in it for a little bit. Not that long. Nothing memorable though, unfortunately. And these plot lines kind of just like happen. It's kind of, and I'm going to say this a lot throughout the review, got that Marvel formula going. It's a group of lovable ragtags who go on this epic adventure as they search for this magical MacGuffin. In this case, it's her brother. And the issue that I was alluding to there with my little use of the quotation marks, I don't know if you saw that, only for the keen eyes out there, is that they're just not lovable, at least for the most part. And the adventure, it just feels empty and meaningless. The stakes just feel plastic and inflated. They're not real. You could put some of the blame on the horrific score, which I wrote was like trying to put a matte finish on a car that's just been re-rendered. What's the point? It's fucked. I guess what I'm trying to say with that is that it's tacky. I think. I don't know if that works as an analogy. But it's over the top to the point where I want to physically throw up. Show me Stanley Tucci's ass again. Really quick. Put that up again. Ooh. Every time I get bored talking about the movie, I'm going to put Stanley Tucci's ass on the screen. That's something I'm going to do throughout this. Thank you, Tucci. And that's the same with the cinematography too. The directing just has no heart behind it. It's got nothing interesting to show visually, which is so sad because it's literally an adaptation of a graphic novel. It was all there. And every scene of this movie just kind of reinforces this idea, this feeling that this movie is made by some sort of robot, very ironically. But to that point, it just always feels cut short. Every scene ends before something interesting has happened. Like, once we've got the exposition, we're moving hastily to the next moment. No time to sit around. Which is so bizarre because all the book is sitting around. It's literally a melancholy, quiet road trip where she's just observing the things around her. It created such a deep world, such a dystopia that could have been explored that they literally spend no time looking at. They're too focused on giving you something like this, something all the time. By deciding to pace it so fast, having to get so many characters in and out of the story so quickly, so many different things moving around, they've literally left no time for exploration, and it just saps the life out of the story. And it culminates in what I'm going to call one of the worst final action scenes I've ever seen in a film. I'll start with the positives, or the positive. The CGI does look good. That's it for the positive. But like, you'd expect that, considering this is Netflix's biggest budget film ever. But the stakes are razor thin. It honestly feels like the Russo brothers can't even do the basics right. Like, this is something that, if you're going back to the Avengers, they used to do so impressively. The big final action scene where all the characters play their role, and I thought they'd at least be able to get that right in this. Somehow in this, the group of like 30 robots who all look like they're falling apart, led by Millie Bobby Brown, who's supposed to be, I guess, a high school student, manages to take down the biggest tech company in the world with just them and a peanut. Woody Harrelson is a peanut. And he helps to take down the biggest tech company in the world. Defense tech company. Millie Bobby Brown manages to break into the building, the headquarters of this company, with genuinely minimal resistance. Like, barely anybody stops her. She gets to her brother, which by their own definition is like the battery powering everything they do, in like a few minutes because some robots are outside. They have drones. Just bomb them. Why are they even out there fighting? Somehow I'd watched nearly 2 hours of this, 2.5 hours, I think. And there was like no connection. It was like I was thrown into something I wasn't expecting to. And you compare that back to the book, where they haven't amped up the stakes to the nth degree, to the point where they don't feel genuine and you don't actually care. And it actually makes the stakes feel higher and more genuine, and you connect to it. It's somewhat ironically quite a human story that they're telling. And it ends with Michelle trying to save her brother, Despite knowing that there could be dire consequences, she tries to take this device off her brother, which is sucking the life out of him basically. She's seen previously how doing this can kill the person, but she really doesn't have any other choice. They're not taking down the big corporation. The big corporation is kind of already won in this story, unfortunately. She just wants her brother back. Her brother has become completely dependent on this device. He can't live without it, and it's rotting him from the inside. She isn't trying to break down the whole regime. She isn't fighting robots off. She literally just wants her brother back. It's the only human connection she has left in this cold world. Okay, now I'm going to move on to a bit of a character analysis. I want to look at each character from the book and the film side by side and see, I guess, how they changed them, or even see which characters they added to the film. And they even took some characters away from the book. And the way this movie sanitizes some of these people is truly something to behold. Let's look at our lead first, Michelle, as she's called in the film, while she remains an unnamed protagonist in the book. The movie did her so dirty. It did her so dirty. They turned her into a clean, slightly frustrated teenager who loves her brother so much. She's just filled with this sort of like revolting goodness that doesn't actually exist, especially not in such a bleak world. She's played by Millie Bobby Brown, as I've mentioned, who, and I don't want to be harsh, is literal cardboard in this film. I mean, they didn't give her a lot to go off, but my god. It's unfortunate, but she's genuinely one of the blandest protagonists I've ever seen. In the book, she's extremely dark and disturbed, which is understandable for what she's been through. I won't spoil too much about her life, but you understand why she feels this way towards the world. It makes sense that she's so disillusioned. Obviously, if you're going to turn this into a family film, you can't have any of that shit. Cut that right out. First thing to go. Dark and despondent. Gone. But like, the degree to which they do this is absurd. They simplify her past beyond belief. Scrub her squeaky clean. Get rid of any lesbian that was in the book. She was... Nah, we're not going to talk about that. We can't talk about that in the family film. Sorry, gays. No, can't be in a family film. They stripped her of her motivation, her anger at the world, and honestly, just any agency she had in the story. She's now a high school girl who's brave and has a lot of heart, and sometimes might be just a little sassy. Just a little bit. But she bears no genuine anger at the world around her, or at least you can't feel it. There's no real emotion that someone in her position would have. And it makes it just so much more of a crime because they had a book which had all these things in it and they just got rid of it. It's bizarre. They just made her a worse character. I'll give a quick positive to the movie here. It's the way they managed to include the character of Skip, the robot. Although I don't like that they reveal he's the brother straight away. That was stupid, like I said. It was always going to be hard to include him in the movie, considering in the book he's just a mute robot. And they did something interesting where they had the Kid Cosmo drone he was in have some voice cues, some like automated responses, which is a pretty fun way to have him engage more in the story while still feeling like a robot. It was a neat change. And the only other character that was maintained from the book, granted the book didn't have that many characters, was Ted, who's played by Jason Alexander, who I might have shown a few times by this point. Ted is Michelle's foster dad. And I think that's where the similarities between them stop, because you can barely even call them the same character, other than the name and their role. A somewhat likable dad figure who finds himself captured by the grips of this technology that also takes her brother at the end of the book. It's this overhead technology that allows you to live in some sort of fantasy world that slowly seems to be rotting the characters from the inside. But Ted does always seem to be on our protagonist's side in the book. And it makes it sort of sad to see what happens to him because of this technology. He ends up on the couch, basically unable to even dress himself, just a body. And it's disturbing, sometimes just for disturbing sake, to be honest. It's probably one of my only complaints with the book, is sometimes I feel like it's just gratuitous to be in your face. But it does show a critical element of the book, and how this technology is sapping people of their autonomy, creating another world where people can live in some sort of fantasy when their mortal bodies become basically just vessels. Once again, it's dark. But he's a pretty pivotal character thematically. So who do you get to play this character? Jason Alexander. Of course. George. We all love George. And he's basically playing the dad from Matilda. He's so cartoonish, it's insane. He detests robots. He hates them. And he makes Michelle's life absolutely miserable at every possible turn. I might have mentioned this quote a few times, but I think it perfectly shows just how like corny his dialogue is. After finding Skip in Michelle's room, and you're not allowed robots, he starts chasing him with a broom, saying, "Do you speak the human?" And then ensues one of the most cartoonish, goofy action scenes I've ever seen. Jason Alexander going all out in this character, giving everything to the physical comedy. But it's just so bizarre and so tacky. Why they turn this character into the villainish stepdad, that old caricature, I have no idea. But seemingly they needed an antagonist to start the story and to get Michelle on the run and out of the home as he calls the police, and then Giancarlo Esposito can chase her for the rest of the movie. He's just a plot device. A really fucking stupid one at that. But what's strange is in the book, there already is an antagonist at home. They just left her out. She also has a stepmom in the book called Bridget. It's not Bridget. The R's after the I, which you don't usually see. So I think Bridget. Oh god, somebody's gonna make fun of me for that. That's probably like a really common name in America. Her stepmother in the book is an absolutely vile character. She's detestable. And she acts as a counterbalance to the nice enough Ted. The movie seemingly merged the two characters into just Ted and stripped her home life of any genuine nuance. So this stepmom was one of the first characters who I realized was in the book and wasn't in the movie. But there were two much more pivotal exclusions from the book, which I want to talk about now. In the book, over these graphics of these strange landscapes, our protagonist is recounting memories with this girl called Amanda, who she forms a romantic relationship with. I'm going to simplify it a little bit here because I think you should go read the book, and I don't want to spoil some really interesting parts. But basically she loses this relationship as Amanda's father, Reverend Ernest Henry, takes them both and leaves across the country, so our protagonist can't see her ever again. It provides what seems like the basis for her hatred of the world. And as she recounts those memories, her love and pain come through so clearly. You understand what could be a faceless protagonist so much more. And it underpins what I said earlier. Although this book is about a dystopia, it's actually a really human story. And it finds a way to be profoundly human with really limited words, yet with more dialogue and words to play with. The Russo brothers seem to have stripped it of its humanity, and our lead character of literally anything that makes her seem like her own person and have her own emotion. Her only pursuit and her only goal is to find her brother in the movie. That's the only thing we know about her. So who is she? The book tells us, it gives us all those memories. Who is she in the movie? I genuinely know nothing about the person who holds the most screen time in the film. And sure, her backstory doesn't have to be as dark as they play it in the book. But you had characters you could have adapted to make her more empathetic and to make us care about her more. But you took them away in favor of Mr. Peanut. Which brings me on to my next point. The characters that they added to the film. Like I said earlier, Chris Pratt and Anthony Mackie were actually good additions, I think. They had a lot of charisma and a lot of energy to the film that it was sorely lacking. I mean, like I said earlier, it's nothing groundbreaking. Chris Pratt literally plays Star-Lord. But it'll do. Because I understand to make this movie function as a whole, you need more protagonists than just a sad girl and her mute robot brother traveling from one end of the country to the other. So some funny sidekicks, fair enough. Chuck them in there. But my problem starts with the rest of the additions to this film. They just have so many goddamn stars attached to this movie, which I never thought I'd complain about. But it just makes it so bloated. Like, how are you supposed to fit them all in? Answer is, you can't. They just shoved in as many characters as they possibly could and made an unfocused mess. And at the same time, they gave none of them enough time so that you could actually care about them. Woody Harrelson plays a peanut, and I could have fucked with that pretty heavy if that was just in more of the movie, if that's what the movie was about. But like, he's in and out. And I said it earlier, his plotline is actually pretty interesting. But when you put it against so many other boring subplots, it just doesn't have any time to shine. Ke Huy Quan's role in this film is nearly impossible to remember, genuine. I mean, for Christ's sake, you have Tucci in this film. And Tucci and Giancarlo Esposito, they're both acting their hearts out. They put in great performances, but the dialogue, it's like they're trying to turn shit to gold, but they just end up turning shit to not so shit, but still stinky. At the end of the day. Still stinky. So Stanley Tucci, playing our lead antagonist Ethan Skate, genuinely delivers towards the end of the movie, and I shit you not, this is the exact quote. During the final action scene, somebody asks him, "What are you going to do?" And he says, as he walks out into the battlefield, "What I always do. Win." What? Why? Like, who wrote this? Why did you write that? What is he supposed to do with that dialogue? Now, the company that he runs in the movie is actually in the book too, Skate. But in the book, it's left as a big faceless corporation you can't defeat, which feels a lot more true to life. Point being, this movie feels all over the place. The characters are flying in left and right, with new subplots and ideas shoehorned in at every possible turn. But in the overall scheme of the movie, they just feel like lazy attempts to shoehorn these stars and characters into the film, possibly trying to give the movie more pull. But I think it's more than that. On reading about the Russo brothers' previous attempt to make like a big budget adaptation for Netflix with The Grey Man, Anthony Russo said this, I'm going to quote, "We try to include characters within this film that you want to know more about in other formats, whether it be other films or series or whatever it may be. So we absolutely approach this as a sort of tip of the iceberg of a narrative universe. Now, whether we actually get to make that universe, we'll see. It certainly depends on how this movie is received by audiences, but as creatives, we approached it that way." And look, The Grey Man obviously didn't go on to get a massive audience, so they didn't get to make those spin-offs. But it feels like they tried the same thing here, not realizing how it can hamper the film. It shows a little about how they approached this film and this adaptation, and how they felt they had to build on it with so many new characters and big stars like the ones I mentioned. Putting stars all over this movie in little bits is an attempt to diversify the amount of projects they could create with it. You want a show about a robotic Mr. Peanut? Woody, you're up. You got a series. But like the movie itself, why aren't we thinking about that? It suffers so much from this outlook. So let's work out what the hell happened here. What perfect storm created this monstrosity? So I have a theory about this movie, which I feel like is only strengthened from what I just mentioned about the characters. It's honestly not even really a theory. It's kind of just what happened. I think the Russo brothers only used this book for its IP, for the characters that it does have in it, and for the world it created. Mainly for the graphics, in all honesty, the designs of the robots and stuff. It didn't use it for its story at all, maybe like that much. And to some people, this might sound fair enough. You don't need to keep the whole book. But it's like you went mining for oil. You found it, and you took home buckets of dirt. Why not take the valuable stuff? Why would you just bring back the meaningless exterior? Sure, it's very visually detailed, and it would have helped a lot because the world building is immense and it's incredible. But it frames a profoundly dark story, a harsh environment, a disturbing look into a dystopia. Trying to insert a family-friendly action movie into this world, it's just so strange. I just don't understand the choice. I saw an article that said there's a conversation to be had as to whether this is even an adaptation, which I think is crazy. It has the same name. It's got the same protagonist. It's got the same design. It's definitely an adaptation. I mean, just because they flip the tone of it doesn't mean it isn't an adaptation. It just means it's a bad one. And that leads me back to my theory. I'll call it a theory because I don't have any evidence to back it up. That the Russo brothers just took this so they could use some IP to create a new franchise, basically. They needed quite a big world where they could embed a few of their own characters, a few character designs that were already there, and try and make a bunch of spin-offs, a bunch of fragmented stories to see what people attach to. I'm guessing they thought they could just get away with changing the tone completely because the IP isn't really that well known. The Electric State isn't exactly a household name. I mean, it still isn't, despite the $350 million they spent on this or whatever. But the book never was. And I think overall, their thinking was probably right. If they weren't so egregious with it, and they didn't create something with so little integrity behind it. And I think it's funny because this big swing to use a lesser known IP so they could kind of mold it to their own design actually kind of bit them in the ass because they didn't really have a recognized fan base that was going to go watch it no matter what, like they would with a Marvel. They had nothing to build off in terms of a fan base. And any fan base they did have to build off for the Electric State, they immediately pissed off by completely changing the story and the tone. So the Russo brothers have a deal with Netflix. That's very well known. I've tried to find how much it's worth or how much money's involved or what exactly the deal is, but I couldn't really find it. But what is known is that Netflix want a tentpole movie series, like a Marvel, because Netflix can make shows. We know that. And they've had a lot of critical success with their movies too. That's established by this point. But their ability to replicate big, blockbuster, theatrical films, that hasn't really been proven yet. Although it is hard to gauge what is a big blockbuster success in the streaming age. I mean, critic scores say something, but Netflix kind of just release data at their whim. Like if something's successful, they'll tell you it's the most successful thing ever. But if something flops, it's just gonna quietly go away. It's probably why you haven't heard of this movie. But I think simply they don't have their tentpole franchise yet, and they're throwing as much money as possible at it to make it happen. I'm sure they salivate when they look at the Avengers Endgame, knowing what that could do for them. Having people stay around for movie after movie, never cancelling their subscription. Every single streaming service executive just got a massive erection when I said that. Huge. Off the charts. But once again, that movie had a pre-existing fan base. One that they nurtured and then grew into the general public. And these comic book fans were attracted to, and they were enjoying the way these stories were being adapted. There was a clear vision from the start. Everybody was committed to the project, to the long term. After one failure, they weren't just going to throw it away. They weren't constantly worried about it ending before it started. Marvel knew they had to build and build, and they knew they had something special at the heart of it. I don't even really like Marvel that much. I don't know, I sound like a real fanboy right now. I just think it's impressive what they've done. With their intentions being clear, there's also just such a wealth of story for them to pick from. Comic books, there's so many. The same can't be said about either of the Russo brothers' attempts to create some sort of cinematic universe for Netflix in the Electric State or the Grey Man. I mean, I won't count it off yet. Time will tell whether the Electric State can spawn its own cinematic universe. But I'm going to make a pretty educated guess right now and say it's not going to happen. Because like I was talking about before, it's pretty hard to tell in the streaming age what's actually a failure in terms of a big blockbuster film. We don't really get the figures from Netflix. So I think the best way to tell that something's a failure is like what happened with The Grey Man. They wanted a cinematic universe. They wanted something that could continue on. And then they didn't get it. And they spent $200 million on that movie. And by that standard, you'd have to say that The Electric State is going to be a failure also. And truthfully, by Netflix's own figures, The Electric State seems to be treading even worse than The Grey Man was. And they still had the nerve to put a stupid cliffhanger at the end of the movie, as if we actually thought we were going to get a sequel. Somehow the robot was still alive at the end. So the Russo brothers talk a lot about how exciting it is to be able to reach such a broad audience with Netflix. That's one of their biggest draws to working with Netflix, is what they claim. They talk about the creative freedom they get afforded when they work with Netflix, and how the streaming giant doesn't really put their nose in anywhere during the filming process. They just put their hands up and they let them do their thing. Which sounds like a great way to work, but I think it severely affects the end product. Because in creating something that is trying to appeal to literally everyone, they're kind of creating something that appeals to no one. They've just completely ignored the art they're adapting. What's the point of even having source material if you're just going to rip it of its soul? Choose something else. I mean, you managed to appease most comic book fans with your work at Marvel, so it can be done. Sure, adaptations require a lot of change, but these changes never came from the right place. From all their press conferences, it was never about the thing that they were creating, or at least it didn't feel like it from the end product. They've even said it themselves, that this level of spending isn't sustainable for Netflix in the long term. And this is one of the highest budget films ever made. And genuinely, when I've talked to people about it, most of them haven't even heard of it. That's true. Go ask somebody. Most people don't know this exists. Something the Russo brothers said about Netflix trying to work with budgets this size was really interesting. They said there's sex appeal and ambition. Netflix wants people to look at them and see high budget movies and almost be drawn in. This romanticism of $350 million spent. Roaring success. With stuff like this, they look at it in terms of percentages. Sure, it's $350 million that they lost, or whatever that figure was. But as a percentage of their overall spend, it's like that big. I'm just intrigued though. How many more failed adaptations and attempts at cinematic universes are we going to get from the Russo brothers and Netflix? So before I finish this video, I want to just quickly show a quote from the Russo brothers that I think is a is a little worrying in terms of the cinematic landscape as a whole right now. With two of the biggest directors working with the highest budgets, this is what they feel. Frankly, in a lot of ways, you're getting a broader audience through something like Netflix. Because going to the movies is expensive. It's somewhat of an elitist experience. You go to other parts of the world, you go to a movie once in your life. And that's a very significant experience for you. You can get Netflix for $10 or $14 and watch 40 stories in a month versus going to the movies and getting one story, once. I think that's important. That's how they look at cinema. The more story you can get into your face, the better. It seems to be the way the world's heading, and I just can't wrap my head around it. How have they turned the experience of going to a cinema into a bad thing and tried to make the general public feel like Netflix, the supreme overlords, are the good guys in the story, and the independent cinema chains are the ones trying to jip you out of your money? And they admit that it's a very significant experience to go to the cinema, but end up at a completely different place than I would. Because it's not always about quantity or convenience. The fact that you have to go out and do it is what makes it special. The fact you have to sit there and watch it on a big screen makes it something that you actually remember. So oversaturation, that's not a good thing. Netflix want a new expensive tentpole series so that they can take audiences away from the cinema and to their service. I'm going to let the Russo brothers in on a little secret here. They're not going to keep prices the same when they do that. They never have. They've shown no history of keeping it affordable for the general public. They're trying to corner the market, and cinemas stop them from doing that. They want to be able to do what they can do, so then they don't have to exist. And so ironically, we all just sit at home and rot away on our couches. It's not a thing to celebrate that Netflix is so cheap. It's devaluing the content we consume, and it's devaluing the experience of movies. And plus, if this movie is the Russo brothers' proof that this model works and is great for the consumer, then they're fucked. So I finish with this. Why did this movie happen? Because the book that's behind me right there, it's more relevant than ever. And an adaptation would have made so much sense right now. You look into the real world with a company like Palantir right now, who are spearheading actual moves into AI warfare. Wars fought through robots are happening, and they've been happening for a long time. And with the wave of AI and new tech coming through, the links between defense and tech are only going to become bigger as tech companies look for ways to integrate AI into warfare. It's genuinely real. And a movie that looked into the ethical dilemma of it all, well, this book would have just been the perfect spearhead for it. With all that being said, who do you write the adaptation for? Children, obviously. By targeting children, they sacrificed a lot of the actual themes of the book that have genuine real-world stakes. I mean, teaching kids that their phones are bad isn't the point of the book. Sure, there's definitely some messaging about technology in there, but there's so much more that should have been discussed. And the world we lived in could have really used an adaptation of this book. That's at least how I feel. And they sanitized it. They sapped it of its thematic depth and served it to an audience who didn't even want it. What a waste.